Check. Welcome again to Wickerson Studios. My name is Michael Wickerson, and I am continuing with these Rhino Development API, Python Rhinoscriptsyntax functions, and I'm trying to pull them into Grasshopper. And if you have a look at what I'm doing, I'll just slide this over, and we'll grab our Grasshopper, make it a little bigger. You'll see that basically these are all the forms that are being baked after playing with not only the selection input functions, which I've been wary of the get objects now. It's not a great one to use in Grasshopper, even though it's okay to get the other things, points included. This one here I had to correct from add point to point add. I'm pretty sure if I take a look there, it's add point. So I technically should go in here and say that's not point add, that is actually add point from a past video, and I'll just save that, and I'll save that as a new form. And then basically I've gone in and I've tried to do add point all the way through. Let me keep track. That's add point. Sorry, and just let me grab in here. Sorry to jump around so much. Just double check that that one is add point, and this one, and that is where the problem was. This one is actually that one's the add point, and I had it correct before I did that. It's just the nature of it. This was point add. So if I double click on there, it's an add point as well. Okay, so that was add point, add point. So let me get this right. And this one should be, it says add point, but I think I'm using point add. So that's the one that needed correcting. So I apologize for that. So let's just take the add out of here. And it's a different function, so it's worth having a look at that. It's something that, you know, if you don't catch, you don't catch. And so that one is actually where I've had the trouble, that one is not the add point function, which I did earlier. It is the point add function, which is actually a different function. We're going to begin with that. So going in here, we'll then get on to transformations, miscellaneous, and line curves, surface, and evaluation. And what you're going to find is there really is the breakdown of why Rhinoscriptsyntax is meant to go in your editor under Tools in Rhino, Python script editor, and you can use all those functions really well in here. Well, you got to do some subtle changes when you end up bringing it into GHPython. There's some reasons to do it and reasons not to do it. Now, like anything, you've got to learn the basics of things. So I'll close this one out, close that one out. And you can see the forms that were generated. I'm going to unbake those. I'm going to turn off everything in these functions because I went a little farther than normal in each one of these. I'm going to take these all to disable. And this one is the one we're going to have a look at to start. Pretty simple. Point add. What I've gone in is I went in and I added a point to begin with, which is where the confusion stemmed from. And I brought in my x, y, z so I could have control over that. And I started it right at the 0, 0, 0. But you can see I can change that. But what's happening is this function is doing some weird things. As I bring that up and I bring this one up, you'll see that that line between them does some funky stuff because of the multiplication of itself, the squaring of the x, y, z from the point 2. When you use point add, you're actually building a vector. And that vector, if I bring up the z, you can see it behaves in a very strange way. So in the vertical direction here, as I play with the z, you see it kind of moves slowly at first at the start, but then really explodes up past it. So it's worth playing with and seeing what the difference between adding a point is and doing a point add, because you'll need 2 points to add those points to it, which is the vector between the two, at least as far as I'm concerned. And so I just drew a line between it. So please play with those two and try and distinguish what the difference between add point and the point add function is. And once again, you can type them in and read what comes up here, or you can jump into your developer and just type in your add point, and that's going to give you one breakdown as to what that means. And then I want you to go in and do the point add, and you're going to find that gives you another a little more descriptive as to what you do. And I basically pulled my scripts from that to start, unless it ended up getting interesting and I wanted to do something to it. So we'll close that one out, and we will take it to disable, and we'll go quickly into the next one and see what I did here. So enable that one. And what I have here as a function is something that will ask me to get points. And although I gave you a little warning at the beginning of this to please be cautious of getting any objects, you can use the point get. So immediately it says select points. And I'm calling this Rhino points, the first script of this. And I did a little bit of a list item, and I did something pretty strange to build this this line between the two. The function needs to run, and it actually is in the mode of running right now. So I'm going to go into here, and I'm going to add my points, and it's going to select this point to this point and draw a line as many times as I want between that. And when I hit enter, it will then make this crazy structure. And it will make that crazy structure no matter how many points I put in here. So if I put in like whatever, 8 or 9 points and hit enter, it's going to pull that up and do this kind of cross-reference between the two because I grafted it afterwards as points and put a line between it. So a nice little pattern. What I did was I just brought in a list and then brought in all these items and said append with this one, this one, and this one. And I didn't do a for loop or anything. I just wanted to have a very simple way of making A be the added points of all what was happening here. So once again, the adding points is a little different. And I haven't run it with just a single point yet, but I'm pretty sure it'll be pretty simple. There it is. So it'll go off to those other 3 points. So you can play with that little script and have some fun and start to visually understand what add points is doing as opposed to point adds. So we'll turn that one disable, and we'll go on to the next script, and you can see what it's going to be. It's labeled surface add surface points, and what I did was I brought that in and compared it to the 4-point surface node. And this is where you have to start being cautious with what's happening. I'll bring them both alive. I guess we'll call that enabling. And the first one was I set up 4 points. So you could hard code in literally, and now it's asking for the 4 corners because my actual script is running. My top script is running. It's saying, okay, get points. And that works. And it's saying, picking your points, 3 or 4 points, it'll build a surface. So if I click 1, 2, 3 and hit enter, it'll build a surface there. If I run that script again and I click 4 points, 2, 3, 4, I'll get a surface there. Now that's very similar to the node, which takes 4 points and builds a surface. But of course, then I'd have to hard code in those points, internalize them, or extract them. Right now, there's nothing there, but I could definitely go in and put my points at those corner sections, or I put them anywhere I want, actually. And then I'd have to hard code this in. That was take a little bit of time. You take this one, you go, set 1 point, go in here and select that one, fine. And you keep doing it. But every time you do it, it's trying to run the first part of the script as well. I did a little something fancy down here in the end, which provided the UV and showed another way of doing it, adding surface points, which is also, but instead I could just pick these 4 points and boom, make that surface. So that's a fun little one to play with, points out, points being generated, and the surface that's generated from it. So not too hard, but it's showing you why. Get to understand, like pick one of these nodes off the shell, off the ribbon tool here, and then try and remake it in Python. And you realize, why am I even doing that? It's such a simple script and it's already provided for me. But that's a sense of making micro plugins, which have been granted to you. And sooner or later, you're going to want to go farther than what the nodes can do. And that's why you're ending up going down this path like what I'm doing. Now, what's the next node surface? This one is enabling. This one is called add line, which is basically that. It's saying where's the start of line, where's the end of line, and it'll draw that line. So that's pretty simple. We're ending up with the Rhino line, which is generated, and then I have another script in here which I can activate. I'll just block out this section of it. Actually, I have to close this one. I don't want to screw that one up. Open this one, and basically 2 sides of the scripts are running. And right now it's saying, okay, what are your, if I run that script, it's saying, okay, get the point of start of line and end of line, and it'll build it. But you can always turn that off by just taking these quotes off, putting them up here to shut down the first part of the code, because I wrote it in 2 different ways. This is pretty simple. You just Python start and end line. Of course, start and end line have been hard-coded in, sort of, into the Grasshopper node, and there they are. So as I change them, you can see that those, you should see, well, I still have to run the first part of the script because it was still playing off of that. Let me run it now, new, and now you can see that I can play off that line and do what I used to be able to do in a line tool, but I basically scripted a line tool, which with the function rs. So you've learned that, okay, sure, you can go up here to curve and you can grab this line tool and pop it in there, start and end point, or you can learn how to script it in Python. And that's really where I'm going as an interest in becoming a developer. So that's why I'm doing these things. So let's shut that one down. It should be pretty straightforward. Remember these files. This one will be under Geometries 003 on my GitHub. I'm going to turn that to disabled. Let's see what we did in the next one, which was add curve, which is going to be very similar to add line. It's just going to allow me more points, enabling it. And already it's saying, okay, how many points? If I did 2 points and hit enter, it's going to be a line. But let me just take off these other points, which are no good right now. If I run that script again, right here, and you'll see what that script looks like, it actually adds points, but it builds those points with a degree of what I want to do, and I actually inputted a degree that I can actually go over here and change it from degree 1, which is a polyline, over to curvatures, changing as I go from 3, 2, 3, and then 4, 5 if I wanted to have it. But basically, if I run this command now, I can pick as many points as I want. It takes all those points and it basically interpolates a curve through that at whatever degree I want, 2, 3, 4, or 5. So that's interesting, and you can see the output of what I'm doing there. Disable that. Now, what's our next node? Let's make sure we shut this one down so I don't. This one's add circle. Pretty simple. You can grab your circle node and do the same thing. Obviously, circle node needs a plane and a radius, and I brought them in hard, not hard coding into the script, but actually through the Grasshopper node scripting. So I'm going to turn that one on, and there it is. It's been generated, and I can certainly play off of two forms of this being written. So I have two once again. The simple one is to just plug in what a circle node would require, a plane and a radius, which I kind of brought in right here, which could be funneled into a circle node in a very similar way. You just take this and plug that into there, and you take this and plug that into there, and you'd have the same thing. But that's not what I'm interested in doing, so I'm just going to plug it in here and have this one running. Let me run that script again. Take this one off. And what did I do? Well, I did something wrong. I forgot to put my radius into the radius. So let's plug that into there, and there you go. You've got the same curve, and you've got the same plane to look at if you want to do that. The other thing to do is to, once again, use what I call the Rhino plane. Take this one off, go down here, and just triple quote that out, and run that script again. You'll see over here, I'm actually playing on a Rhino plane. Whatever the plane was in here, and since I did an axis rotation on it and I changed the shape of where that plane was, I can play off of that, the Rhino plane, and run it again, and I can play it off of a rotation around this angle, so the rotation can actually, as I move that, you'll see how that rotation is in the z-axis right now, I think, or it's defaulting to the x-axis, so you can see that's rolling that all around and then generating my circle actually off in this direction, which is interesting why it's over there. That plane's the one that's being used. So that's interesting. You just have to get in there and realize what's happening with the script. I'm going to take this one. I'll let you play with that one as making circle, but basically making circle from a Ghpython script instead of depending on these closed kind of clustered scripts that work within very simple nodes. And of course, this seems very trivial, and people say, why would I even want to do that? Well, sooner or later, you're going to hit a limit. You're going to have trouble finding plugins, and you're going to come up with ideas that haven't been invented yet. So that's the excitement of all this, at least in my mind. Let's close the script out. We'll go into the next one, which is add rectangle. I had a little fun with this. Let's just take a look at what I did. Enable. That's preview off, which I didn't mean to do. Let's take enable, and let's take preview on. And you'll see what I got here. I made this strange thing that basically grabs a point system. It makes a rectangle from there on this plane at a certain size, and it takes those areas. If I take off of here, you can see it basically generates those through rotation through 2pi, and I can slop that and make it be less or more. And I've written the script so it's actually pretty tied to itself, so I can see the connections between it. Very simple: rotate plane X, rotation XYZ is a list. Rectangle is then the plane, and then the UV, which I brought in. UV can be played with as well as to the dimensions of those rectangles as they go off longer and they go off thicker. And then what's nice is I did a loft through that by just a simple flattening. So you're able to go into here and say, okay, well, what if I did want the steps to be less? Then I'd have less objects in there. There's 4, and I could also have it less of a circle. And it's open at the one end, so you'd have to close that either way, but you're making a pretty interesting canopy. For the use of making a rectangle, I think I've made a pretty interesting script to make some pretty interesting geometries. And it's fully parametric, and then it bakes very nicely into a form, and I guess I could go in here and do some other changes and move it the XYZ direction if I didn't want it in that location, and I could orient it to other points. So a nice little script on learning how to use the RS add rectangle node. And once again, that's not too much different than going in here and using the rectangle node or using the polygon set at 4 sides. But you are learning how to write script, and you're starting to understand it, break it down, and that's what it kind of is all about, at least in my mind. The next node, which is a Python node, is add planar surface, and this is pretty interesting. We'll just run through this one, enable. And what it does is I took a surface region, I took a number of count, which I probably set to 3. I have a number slider that will change the seeds, and you can see how that changes in picking other 3 points. I pulled them apart, and then I basically said, let's make a line between each of the points, because if these points touch each other, you actually can make a surface from them, and that's exactly what the node does. It just makes a planar surface from curves, a list of curves. As long as those curves are touching, it will generate it, and that's no different from you saying, you know, let's make a line from here to here, to here, and then back to there, and then let's just go in and make the whatever surface from curved edges for 4 edges, and that's the one we're going to do. And it's going to say, oh, Sorry, I never do Rhino, so I like to sit back and do this stuff again. Let's take those three, select 1, 2, or 3 edges. Ah, I never use Rhino. Oh my gosh. And open curves. Interesting. Select 1, 2, or 3 open curves. Why am I not able to select that? Why am I such a fool? Let's go in here again. And oh, I know why. I know exactly why. Because I went and I made this one to there. Stop it. Then I want to go in and make it again. So I want to go ahead and make that curve again. And I want to start at that point and go to here because I want them to be separate and end it. And then I have to go in here. And because it was recognizing it as a polyline, and that's not how it was. So now when I go in, with all luck, even though I'm kind of foolish and I should have known that, I can pick those all three and say make a surface from that. And there you go, you get the surface. Just the same as you made a surface over here, but keep in mind that this is the ghost is forming grasshopper. So if you want that surface, obviously you got to go in and bake it. So just something to play with. Nice little script on add planar surface. Sorry for the slowdown, but sometimes your mind gets into such wells and pits and things that you forget to do the most simplest thing, or you get out of practice with one thing because your mind is much farther into the Python script, so you're not even thinking of the Grasshopper node script, so you're not thinking of the Rhino script, which is where it all came from. And I'm afraid you start to, you know, discover more about yourself and forget who you are, which is always exciting about, what life's all about. This is a nice little script that I wrote, and it's making an ellipse. And what I did was I put it into a list, and I decided for I in range X, which I can change from 3. I can go into here, and you can see that I can make a different list of beautiful patterns, and I haven't even raised them or lifted them. And as long as I had J greater than 1, I could do a double, I could make a grid pattern, and then I just did a plane times X times I and Y times J, and I appended that list, and I get these really beautiful patterns. Very simple node. And for a basic jewelry or architectural plugin or something you want to do, I haven't even pulled it into 3 dimensions yet, but it's not very hard to do that and throw it through a 3rd iteration. You've got some great forms coming out of using ellipses. And once again, the ellipse tool, if you go in here and start generating ellipses this way, you still have to figure out how to plug in all these different things, X and Y, to alter that and make it more interesting. So I think I've got a really decent little script there, and I'm very happy with that one. And sometimes it's the simplest, smallest things that make the biggest difference. Okay, I hope this is going well. I hope I'm recording because I'm excited about this one. I tried it a few times last night, but I was too beat from doing it. What do we have here? I have a very strange thing that I actually took a box, and you can see that it's fudged out because I've got it set at 3. But if I set this at 2, I've only set it at 2 and 3. It basically is a script to produce a box, and I had to kind of what I call hard-coded in the list items of these points. So I did a double iteration. I only did it 2 by 2. It actually runs 3 by 3 and still generates a box. It doesn't look like it's going to, but as you look at the box that actually comes out of that, it's interesting. It produces this pattern, but it actually produces a box, and it works on 2 by 3 and goes from a box this scale to this scale. I think that's pretty interesting to see what happens, even though geometrically it's producing something like this as opposed to this. So that's like trying to wrap your head around the logic behind the geometry that's then informing the logic afterwards. And of course, I had to put these in the right order because you count a box, I think, counterclockwise or clockwise, 1, 2, 3, 4. So when we're at the 2 setting, I want to be able to list 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and then line that up so it actually goes from these points to these points and builds a box between them. And there's no reason that they have to stay in a cube form like this. They can go all wonky and all over the place. And you definitely get a sense of that when you start to edit your values and bring this up to something like 4, and let's roll that up to 4 and see what happens. Well, it flattens right out, so that's not so good. You can keep going to 5 and see what happens as well. But obviously 3 and 2, it works for what I wanted to do, and it's a dysfunctional little node, but it's not well behaving. But at least I'm scripting, and I'm doing less in Grasshopper node based, and I'm actually doing more and more in this program. The next one is add cone, which I think is interesting because it's just like the add cone, and I'll enable it, and there it is. What I did was I just wanted to be able to work my XYZ and pull out that form and be able to change it. But then I had to do a little math in here. So when I added the height, I could have done it hard-coded in here. Well, not hard-coded, but I could have brought it in as Z plus H, which is what I did. But I also passed in these numbers that H is being fed here. The height is something separate, so I can actually raise and lower the top of it, but I can also Z raise and lower the entire cone without lifting and lowering the bottom. If I wasn't careful with that base and I left that unplugged, you'll see that it's an interesting little shift in geometry. If I didn't do this one, where's that one run off to? Up to Z. If I took that off, well, it doesn't work at all if I do that. Hang on a second. I think it's if I take off the height. No, I have to think what I was doing. I have to get into the math a little bit. I keep disabling that. Anyway, you can play with it. You still shifted the size and scale in the X and the Y in positioning it. Sorry, in the X, but the radius obviously changes it. But get to understand that a little bit. The cone itself is being formed as a closed bret. It's actually closing at the bottom, which is interesting, as opposed to having a cone that you have to close if you're using an actual node in Grasshopper. And yeah, simple little script for making cone, playful, have fun with it, do something with it a little more interesting than what I did. The next one is add cone, and then I get into this yellow warning area, and I'm going to talk about that as a finale on this section, enabling the add cone. You'll see what I did here, and here's where I started to pull in. I wanted it to behave differently, so as I bring it in and I start to play with this, you'll see I can raise and lower the top of the cone, but when I play with this seed factor, I raise and lower the cone instead of lifting and lowering the base and leaving the top at the same spot. Just a little bit of math, and you can tuck this into the system itself as a new base, radius, height. Nothing too different, but sometimes when you're changing up your script, you just want to have an understanding of it. So just cut and paste the whole thing and play with it again. I'll take that and put it to disable. Now, here's where it gets interesting. Is I went into here and I was like, holy shit. Okay. Oh, pardon my language. Let's take the top one and let's put that to enable. And you see what I have here is I have a sweep that's working. Well, the sweep's working because I have a sweep on. And for those that obviously know sweep, yeah, it's going to work with just a curve that it's following, and the rail system, the circle where it's going to go. So between this and this, I can just sweep that along and get this form, nice and easy. But the problem is, for working a sweep in here, it actually dictates GUIDs, and it makes it work by GUIDs on a rail and a shape to follow. But I have this little script that I learned from Carl Singline, and I love it. It's the simplest script in the world, and here it is. Rhino import. I can make it a lot smaller if I wanted to. I have it in my snippets tool. I use it quite often when I have to go from geometry to GUIDs, global identifiers, and there it is. You want to kind of cut and paste that one and put it up here in your snippet tool and have it available to you whenever you need it, and there it is. And it doesn't produce any geometry because it's just finding a GUID. But the snippet tool is a wonderful thing to do, but I still was having problems because it was saying, the string representing the GUID failed to convert, and I was like, why am I getting so stuck on a sweep node? To learn how to write it into a Rhinoscriptsyntax when I have to deal with geometries. So I started to try and convert these back and forth from geometry to GUID, and I was like, forget it. This is where it starts to break down at a certain point, Rhinoscriptsyntax, and you're starting to see the need to learn more about Rhino common namespaces, which is why I have to make slowly a shift to that. So enough said on that. I'll close that out again. I'm not going to save it. I'm going to take this top one, keep it running. I will take this one and just put it on disable. And then we'll go down here and we'll enable this bottom half, enabling, and that's the sweep too. And that makes for an interesting little curve that once again, it's working off of this curve and then the two rails. So two rails and then the same circle as a section going through it. And you can see that that one's going to sweep along those two, and it's going to behave just like working in Rhino. It's going to produce this. And once again, I could have gone in and started to write this again, but it's going to demand a GUID reading. And the reason I know that is you go into here and you hit RS add sweep 1, and just take a look at what that says. And this is where it differentiates. I'll have to put in this for a second, and there you go. You're starting to read in here, and my picture's in the way, so I'll just move my ugly face up there, and you can take a look here that obviously the sweep rail, it's a shape. It needs a rail GUID identifier for the rail curve, and it needs a shape. But whenever I'm producing this way, I'm actually producing a geometry, and you'll know that because when you take that to a, you'll see that the geometry comes up instead of a GUID, so you can convert that. Which is what this basically does. It puts it into a GUID, yet I was still having trouble with it just running. So logically, it's got to be so close to getting there. But I was getting to the end of the video, and I'm like, all I'm going to do is accomplish something that's already so simple and in a node in Grasshopper. So I'll have to go farther and improve my skills as I go deeper into that. And I think other people will have the same sense of that. That said, there's some warning there. So there's some red not to use get objects. There's a little bit of trouble with that. It can be a little crazy, and you'll see that on the forum all the way back to 2012. Maybe they've remedied it, but I'm going to take this to disable. I'm going to take this all to preview off, and I'm going to group that into a cluster. And what we're going to do now is have a little bit of fun in a minute with these 4 awesome scripts, and we'll just move these ones over, and it's going to get even more awesome when we go into those. But transformation objects right here. Actually, I'll probably leave it here, and I'll start to just produce my nodes that can make that very interesting. Once again, this is all coming from an interest and going into here, getting into the GUID under the Rhinoscript syntax. And like I said earlier, while you're starting to do that, let me go back to where the beginning was. Actually, it'd be easier if I just click Rhino Developer. The APIs that you're going to end up using, you're going to slowly go into these namespaces, and you're going to end up using Rhino Geometry to start with. And you're going to find that all these things are a lot more in depth than what the Rhinoscript syntax is going to allow you to do. And I must admit, this whole series is coming off of a great course that produced a hyperlink Michigan course cheat sheet, which is basically that cheat sheet they were providing right here. What I've done is basically pulled out all of these hypertext linked sweep 1, sweep 2. These jump very directly right into here. But because these all don't run perfectly in a Ghpython script, I've basically taken that cheat sheet from the University of Michigan. I didn't want to disseminate it, send it out there, but it's a nice sheet to get a hold of. It's basically your most common Rhinoscript curves, and I'm going to use that for a while to inspire these video series. So thanks very much for watching. 26 minutes.